Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another quadruple header of WWD What Went Down. Today we're going to be talking about the results of Week 14, the very last regular season game of the season. 4 people are now eliminated, and we're only down to 8. The playoffs will begin in this upcoming week, as you guys know. And either way, let's get right into it. We're going to be talking about the games that took place between the Steelers and the Patriots, the Cowboys and the Eagles, the Dolphins and the Titans, and the Packers and the Giants. We're going to be talking about all those games that took place. There was a doubleheader on Monday night, which is why we're talking about 4 instead of 3. Um, but either way, we'll kick things off with myself against J-Bay. In terms of standings, this didn't mean anything for J-Bay, but it did mean that if I won, I would secure the number 4 seed no matter what. I did just that. Um, and the players I had in this game, we'll kick things off with A.J. Brown. I had A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown went out there and had a pretty solid night. I know he only had 14 points, which takes him into the red, but 9 catches for 94 yards. It doesn't really get much better than that. That's a pretty solid performance overall. I'll take it. I'm happy with it. He did lose a fumble, which dropped him down to 14 points, but overall, that's a pretty solid performance. I'll never be upset about. I also had Jalen Warren. With Jalen Warren, he went out there and had a good 8-point game. He really couldn't get anything going on the ground. The Patriots' run defense was very strong against Pittsburgh on Thursday night. Um, but he did go out there and have 4 catches for 29. Though, and even though he did have that, um, it all did result to a okay performance. He came close to his projections, just a few points off. 8 points overall isn't terrible. I'd hope for more, but oh well. The Steelers in general just really couldn't get much going on offense in that game. Speaking of, I also had their defense, Pittsburgh's defense. They went out there and they held New England to 21 points. Now, at the first half, they looked horrible. New England was actually dicing through the entire. New England was dicing Pittsburgh's entire defense. They were making them just look like shit. Pittsburgh's defense was making Bailey Zappi look like Joe Montana out there, and yeah, they were struggling in the first half. The second half, they did pitch perfect though. They could not have done anything better in the second half in terms of their defense. Fantastic performance there. They were able to grab 2 sacks and an interception. And all around, they didn't really do too much to score fantasy points though. Had an okay performance. Could have been a lot better. I was kind of hoping for a lot better. I'd say it's a little disappointing, but overall, it's still okay. Um, then I also had Xavier McKinney, safety for the Giants, play on Monday Night Football. He went out there and hit his projection just barely. Compared to how he's done all season, it's disappointing, but overall, it's not a horrible game. He had 4 total tackles on the game. He also had a fumble recovery. I'm not too happy with this, if I'm being honest. He did go in the green a little bit, but I would definitely hope to see more tackles moving forward. I don't like the sudden drop from 10 tackles to 4. That's a little concerning, but we'll have to wait and see how he does. I'm probably going to keep starting him either way. Hopefully, he does better in upcoming weeks. I had Cameron Hayward play on Thursday Night Football as well. Um, with him, he was able to secure one of those sacks. He had 6 total tackles, and then he had that 1 sack that he had for Pittsburgh. And overall, it's a pretty solid night, a good 18.5 points. This is the Cam Hayward I was talking about whenever we were doing the rankings video, for example, where he's basically a more consistent Myles Garrett, where he'll usually get around 10 points at least every game. Usually he'll get closer to 13 to 14 points. A very solid option in fantasy, and he usually doesn't disappoint. Um, then on top of Cam Hayward, I also had Jordan Love. He was on my bench, so I didn't really start him. He didn't have too great of a night against the Giants. In terms of fantasy, he had 1 touchdown pass, 1 interception. He also had 2 rushing attempts for 2 yards, and he threw for 218 yards. This really wasn't a great night for Jordan Love. He had a long stretch where he was doing really good again, but this previous week wasn't it. Granted, it could have been better if he was able to get actual touchdowns. That was the main problem, is the Packers really could not secure their touchdowns in this game. But overall, I'm not too concerned about that moving forward. I think this is more of a fluke. But Jordan Love, I don't like his consistency overall. He's had stretches of this season where he just decided to start doing good and then he started doing bad. Um, well, not really stretches, but he's just had random games where he just decided to fall off a little bit. Either way, I do think he's a pretty solid option as a starter in fantasy. Um, then we'll move on to J-Bay. J-Bay had Jalen Waddle to kick things off with. Jalen Waddle went out there and had 13.9, pretty close to his projection. He had 6 catches for 79 yards. Overall, it's solid. It's about what you'd expect out of Jalen Waddle. Better than a lot of the games he's had this season. Some of the most yards he's had, probably his third best game on the season. Pretty solid performance for him. Then J-Bay also had Deontay Johnson. Um, Deontay Johnson went out there, had 14.7. Deontay Johnson went out there and had 3 catches for 57 yards and a touchdown in back-to-back weeks. It's actually funny Deontay Johnson is scoring touchdowns now. He started a long, long stretch, Steeler fans know this, where he just did not score a touchdown, and he was able to go out there and actually make it work twice in a row now, so that's overall a good sign for, well, not really. It doesn't really matter to J-Bay anymore, but either way, Deontay Johnson went out there and had a pretty solid night, so I think Steelers fans are happy about that in terms of him actually being red zone usable now. J-Bay also had New York's defense, or not New York, the New England Patriots defense, my bad. Um, they were pretty much the same edge of the coin as the Steelers. The only difference is they gave up 3 less points, 2 sacks, 1 interception, basically the same stat line as Pittsburgh had. Um, they actually did really good for not having Christian Gonzalez and just dealing with so many injuries around the board. Um, Either way, they were able to do really freaking good on this Thursday night game. Their main problem is actually penalties. They were getting penalties left and right for holding, for pass interference. From a fantasy point of view, the good news is that doesn't count as yards or anything against them. But overall, if there's any complaint I'd have, it would be that. Their defense has been pretty good, though, for the last few weeks, especially where they haven't given up more than 18 points since week 9, and even then it was only 20 points. But overall, their defense has been pretty damn good. Then we'll talk about Kenneth Gainwell, who J-Bay had on his bench. Kenneth Gainwell at this point is almost entirely useless in terms of Philadelphia. They sometimes go in there and throw him in, but this week specifically, he had 4 carries for 28 yards, which is pretty good. That is 7 yards per carry, for what it's worth, which is pretty good. Maybe he can earn himself some more time moving forward. I kind of doubt it, though. But either way, he was able to at least have a good yards per carry for whatever it's worth. Maybe he goes to another team and can become a starter there in upcoming years. Then on top of that, you also had Jeff Wilson. Jeff Wilson at this point is just not even in the game with Kane back. I don't even think he's usable in any type of fantasy format or for any league. Heck, I think when the Dolphins inevitably end up cutting him, I don't think there's a promise that he even gets signed to a team, to be honest. I think he was just very overrated whenever he was playing for San Fran behind that really good O-line. Then with J-Bay, he also had Jake Ferguson on his bench, who played on Sunday Night Football against the Eagles. Jake Ferguson goes out there and has 12-point week, pretty solid, 5 catches for 72. Can't really ask for much more. I think J-Bay would be pretty happy with that. And overall, say goodbye to J-Bay. This is the last time we'll see him this season. Maybe he'll come back next season. We can only wait and see. Then we'll take a look at what was perhaps the biggest upset of the week, where Toxic Zenpai actually got upset by MILF. Now, for MILF, this didn't mean anything. He was just playing one last game of the season. He was pretty much playing for pride at this point. For Toxic, this game could have potentially meant that he got the 4 seed or even a division title if things went his way. Unfortunately, he did not win. He didn't drop his seed or anything like that, but he missed out on the opportunity to raise up to the number 3 or even possibly number 2 seed. So MILF really held him back here, which is going to set him up to play against me in the first round of the playoffs. But either way, MILF came up clutch with the big upset on Toxic Zenpai here. I don't think anybody was really expecting this out of MILF. I'm glad to see that MILF became more competitive as the season goes on. I think it's a very fitting end to his season to at least pull off a big upset here. I hope MILF would be willing to come back again next season. It seems like he's getting a lot better, and I'd like to see a competitive team out of him. But we'll kick things off with Toxic here and who he had. Toxic had Kevin Byard. Now, Kevin Byard went out there, had a little bit of a disappointing night compared to some of these previous weeks he's had, but overall not a terrible night. He still had 5 tackles, and he also had that pass deflect as well. It could have been better, don't get me wrong in the slightest, but overall he still had an okay performance, and I don't think that's ever anything to be too sad about. He has some good upside while keeping a relatively consistent 6+ points per game, or 7+ points per game. If I'm Toxic, I'm not worried about that. I would just be expecting around that amount every week with occasional upside. Don't expect 20 points every week. I think that's a little unrealistic. But either way, then Toxic also had A.J. Dillon on his bench, and that's actually all Toxic had out of all of these games, surprisingly enough. A.J. Dillon goes out there and plays without Aaron Jones yet again. He had 15 carries for 53 yards, really couldn't get much going on the ground for the most part, getting about 3 yards per carry, give or take. Getting kind of close to 4, but he also had 2 catches for 25 yards. That's where he has looked impressive all season, where he's getting a lot of yards per carry on the receiving side of things, surprisingly enough. And overall, A.J. Dillon, once Aaron Jones comes back, I would say is probably not going to be usable anymore. But Toxic did get really lucky with him in the sense of A.J. Dillon ended up being pretty good after Aaron Jones was out for the season for the most part. Um, so overall, I think Toxic at least got lucky for his use, but I don't see him being useful for much longer. Just in the time that Aaron Jones is out. Then we'll move on to MILF, and damn, buckle up because MILF had everybody on the roster. Mitch Trubisky, my favorite player in the NFL. He's sexy as fuck. He likes to kiss titties. Um, with Mitch Trubisky, he went out there and had a lot in terms of fantasy. A pretty solid night from fantasy. I think the projections are very low on him. He went out there and had 23.6 points on the night. About 10 points in the green. Definitely helped MILF out here. He had 190 passing yards. He had a passing touchdown, one interception. He also had 8 carries for 30 yards and a rushing touchdown as well. He was able to at least get the Steelers to move the ball somewhat. Um, Now, don't get me wrong. Is Trubisky the best QB in the NFL? No, not at all. But at least the Steelers' offense was moving, and it looked like they were a little bit just more able to score points, is the best way I can describe it. Sure, they might cause more turnovers, but either way, at least the ball can move. As if you're a Steeler fan, you can decide which you like more. I personally would rather take Trubisky, though. From a fantasy point of view, Trubisky went out there and didn't upset. Helped Milf get a good solid 10 points on the night in the green, and that definitely helped towards his win here. Milf also had Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith went out there and played against the Cowboys on Sunday night. Had 5 catches for 73 yards. You'd hope for more catches, but the yards were great. If he got a touchdown, it could have been a really good night. A good night. Um, then Milf also had Jesus, he has like everybody else. Had Najee Harris play. And same thing with Jalen Warren. Najee Harris really could not get much going on the ground. 12 for 29. He was not even getting 3 full yards per carry. A pretty bad performance there. He did get some good receiving game going. He had 3 for 19 yards overall. But that was pretty much it on the night. It was pretty disappointing for him. Najee Harris has just been the definition of disappointing this season, both in real life and from a fantasy perspective. Um, then Milf on top of that also had Ezekiel Elliott. Now Ezekiel Elliott was probably the direct reason Milf actually won this contest here against Toxic. Nobody was really expecting this. He went out there and had about 3 yards per carry uh, for Milf, which isn't great in terms of real life, but at least he got 68 yards. Where he really did good was the 7 catches for 72 yards and the touchdown that he had through the air. Nobody expected this out of Ezekiel Elliott. He was looking like 27, or what do you want to call it, 2016 Ezekiel Elliott. Maybe not that good per se, but he was doing really good in terms of fantasy. Got a good 28 points, a fantastic night. And this is directly what helped Milf. Now, if Ramondre Stevenson is out in upcoming weeks, there isn't really a sign to say to bench Ezekiel Elliott. He's looking like a very solid option in these upcoming weeks. Then Milf on top of that had Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed popped off on Monday Night Football. He had 4 catches for 38 yards. He also had a touchdown. It looks like the Packers are also really trying to use him in terms of the run game. They also had him get 27 yards on 8 carries. And he also had those 7 return yards as a nice bonus. But other than that, he did really freaking solid. I think it's his best game of the season. Yeah, it's his best game of the season. A very solid night. You'd hope for more targets and maybe some more yards, but overall, he's able to go in the green. He's getting a lot of opportunities, and he is looking like a solid option in fantasy that Milf has. And he's another direct reason that Milf won this game. Then on top of that, Milf also had Jason Pinnock, who is another just stud that Milf had this specific week, who had a 4-tackle solo game. He also went out there and had himself an interception. He also went out there and had 2 pass deflects. And he also had 21 return yards on that interception. A very solid night for him. He's been very inconsistent to say the least all season, which is why I haven't been a fan of him. But last night, he was able to show off that interception upside and was able to have one of his upsided games, which, again, was a reason Milf won this game. There were a lot of players that really did good and really did their part to help him win here. Now, with that being said, Shaquille Leonard goes out there in his first game with Philadelphia and doesn't do shit. He had a tackle solo and a tackle assist. Granted, he was on a limited snap count. I don't know exactly what percentage of the snaps he was on off the top of my head, but he was on a limited snap count. He has been playing through injuries all season. So overall, I don't think it was really great to assume that he was going to do anything special this first week, but maybe in upcoming weeks, it's possible that he could do good. But either way, it's kind of too late for Milf, unfortunately. Milf also had Rudy Ford, who since Jonathan Owens has taken over for Darnell Savage, has actually fallen off significantly. You can look at these previous weeks and you can say it's because of the injury, whatever you want to say. Um, he's just kind of fallen off. He only had one tackle solo. He did actually manage to get a fumble recovery, which stopped him from having a complete shitter of a night, but it really wasn't good. And if you have him in any leagues, I'd say he's cuttable until he does something. Um, then on top of that, Milf also had Demarcus Lawrence, who did fuck all. He had a whole point. Not really much to say. He had a tackle assist. He got shut down by the Eagles' offensive line, to say the least. Um, then on top of that, Milf also had Jawan Bentley. Jawan Bentley went out there and had a disappointing night, to say the least, but at least he did have 7 tackles. He kind of got screwed over on the amount of assists he had. He did get the 2 tackle solo, which made his night a little bit better, but I'd say this is definitely disappointing, but at least you know it wasn't anything like, say, 3 points or anything like some of these other guys had. Um, then with MILF, you also had Jack Gibbons. I was looking for him. Jack Gibbons went out there and had basically the same night as Jawan Bentley, except instead of having 2 and 5, he had 3 and 3. Now, I know they both scored 9 points, but from a fantasy point of view moving forward, I would always prefer the 2 and 5 night instead of the 3 and 3 night, just because it's overall more times he's making plays on the ball. And I am a fan of that moving forward. I do think Jack Gibbons has found a way to actually. Well, I'm not a fan of Jack Gibbons moving forward. I'm just saying for upcoming years, I'm a fan of the tackles moving forward. Jack Gibbons over these past 2 weeks has found a way to actually be somewhat fantasy reliable, but I would say there's probably better options out there in any of your leagues if you play defense. Jack Gibbons is probably not one of the better ones, to be honest. Um, and overall, this is a very fitting end to MILF's year. I hope you enjoyed this season, MILF. I hope you come back with us. Um, Overall, sucks you're eliminated, but at least you went out fighting like a dickhead. um, then we'll move on to Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled and Rotatorship. Man, we're just moving on to all the teams that are completely out at this point. Um, with this matchup, Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled technically had a chance at the playoffs, while Rotatorship was almost locked in no matter what. Rotatorship heard that there was a technical chance he could miss the playoffs and decided he was going to fucking just bully Evan. By the way, Rotatorship, you're getting steroid tested, by the way, because, yeah, you're getting drug tested anyway. Piss into the cup. Meet me at the counter. Yeah, this is bad. Scramble did not go out looking good in the slightest. He hit the green. That was good news, but unfortunately, Rotatorship kicked his ass. It was not even close. This earned Rotatorship the number 6 seed and is going to allow him to play against Booty Basher instead of having to play Justin Likes Cage, which is slightly better. I'd say Booty Basher is a more favorable opponent. And then this completely knocked Scrambled Wiggle Waggled out of the playoffs. He cannot do anything no matter what now. So overall, we'll kick things off with Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled, who had Brandon Cooks, who had his first bad night in a few weeks now. He went out there and had 2 catches for 37 yards. You'd hope for more targets. You'd hope for more yards. You'd hope for more everything. Now, I would say that the main reason, if I had to guess, for why Brandon Cooks didn't do good, and I've noticed this left and right, when teams have multiple good cornerbacks, it's when Brandon Cooks gets shut down. You've seen it all season, whether you're looking at teams like the 49ers who have Diamondre Lenore and Charvarius Ward, or you look at teams like the Eagles who have Darius Slay and James Bradbury, or you look at teams like that. Um, Moving forward, if you see, say next year Brandon Cooks is still in the Cowboys, I'd be willing to bet if you're going against a team where the team that Brandon Cooks is going against only has one good corner, that's probably games where he'll do really good, just as some insight moving on to next year, if you guys happen to remember any of this. But overall, this specific night was a bit disappointing. Won a few points in the red, and I don't think that was very helpful towards Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled. Scrambled also had Chris Boswell, who went out there and had an okay night. He had 7 points. He won a point in the red. Could have been better, could have been worse. He didn't miss any kicks for whatever that's worth, so overall, that's a good sign. You'd hope for him to be able to kick more, though, because the Steelers' offense was kind of atrocious. But he did nail a nice 50-yarder for what it's worth. That was nice from a real-life point of view. I think Pittsburgh's happy to have him as a kicker. From a fantasy point of view, could have definitely been better, though. Then on top of that, you had Dallas's defense. Now, with Dallas's defense, they went out there and held the Eagles' offense to 13 points. Fantastic performance in real life. Absolutely fantastic. And hell, I don't know if you guys know this, the only touchdown the Eagles scored was actually when the Eagles were on defense, not the Cowboys. So it wasn't even the Cowboys' defense. In all reality, they held the Eagles to 6 points on this game. It was complete domination. The main thing is they just couldn't score fantasy points for the most part. They got stuck at around 24 points. They did give up a sack, or they didn't give up a sack. They did get a sack. They also had 3 fumble recoveries, so they were forcing fumbles and got a sack. Other than that, they really couldn't do anything to score points, unfortunately. This defense, while it was pretty much the only thing giving Scrambled and Wiggle Waggle's team life this season, they did fight like hell until the end. Very good defense in both real life and fantasy, even with the injuries they're currently dealing with. And I think we'll be happy to see him again next year. I think that defense will be pretty good again next year. Um, from a fantasy point of view. Then with Scrambled Wiggle Waggled, he also had Deshaun Elliott, who went out there and just about hit his projections. He also got injured with a concussion, so it could have been a really good night if he didn't get hurt, but he had a total of 8 tackles on the game. It seems like the absence of um, Jerome Baker is really helping everyone else on this defense in terms of getting tackles. Deshaun Elliott was no exception, had a nice 8 tackle game, basically hit his projection, and then got hurt. That's unfortunate, but oh well. Um, then Scrambled and Wiggle Waggle also had um he also had Zach Seiler, who kicked off the game against the Titans with a pick six, like one of the first plays of the game. He had 4 tackles on the game, and then he had that interception for a touchdown. I know he had that pick six, but other than that one play, he really couldn't get much going for most of the night. Outside of that one pick six, he only had 1 tackle solo and then 3 tackle assists, which would have held him at 5 points on the night. But Scrambled got really lucky with this one and did manage to get a nice pick six to end off his fantasy season. Um, then Scrambled also had a Landon Roberts. He went out there and didn't have too many tackles, but he did manage to actually go out there and get a sack. He had 6 total tackles, which wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I thought he actually had less than that, but he did actually go out there and get a sack. Pretty solid performance out of him. The sack made a okay night go to pretty good. And overall, Landon Roberts was probably Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled's one of his best pickups on the season. Definitely a smart pickup from him. He's been solid all season and is very good in terms of fantasy if anybody needs him in another league. Um, Other than that, that's all Scrambled Wiggle Waggled had. Then we'll talk about Rictatorship. Now with Rictatorship, he actually had Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb like he always does. Dak Prescott won a few points in the red, could have been better. But to be fair, Dak Prescott did really good in real life. This isn't really like a matter of him playing like shit. He did about as good as he could have. They were just running the ball a lot, trying to kill time. The Cowboys in general were just bullying the Eagles. Um, he did throw for 271 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. He ran for 3 for 11. Pretty solid night around the board. Pretty good. Just unfortunate for Dictatorship, won a few points in the red. CeeDee Lamb went out there and had a pretty good game. I think he's just a little over projected. Still a very good game overall, even though he won a few points in the red. 6 catches for 71 yards and a touchdown. Only CeeDee Lamb can manage to go in the red with a stat line like that. That is insane. Absolutely no worries for Dictatorship moving forward. Um, then on top of that, Dictatorship also had, um, let's see here, Dictatorship also had Saquon Barkley. Um, with Saquon Barkley, he went out there and had a nice night. I think he had 2 touchdowns. He went 20 for 86, getting over 4 yards per carry. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. He also had 3 catches for 15 yards. The only thing I'd hope for more of is receptions for more yards. Other than that, very nice night for Dictatorship. Dictatorship's looking like he has a pretty good running back, and I definitely don't regret trading him at all. Anyway, moving on. Um, Dictatorship also had Brandon Aubrey, who had, I think, the best kicking game out of any kicker this season. I could be wrong from a fantasy point of view. But he went out there and had not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 field goals and 3 extra points. One of the better nights I've seen. And keep in mind, he had 3 50-yard field goals. That is insane. This is probably the best kicking night I've ever seen. In fantasy, maybe I've seen one. I just can't remember it. But damn, Brandon Aubrey was amazing, and I think Dictatorship is happy to see that. Um, then Dictatorship also had. Then he also had Philadelphia's team defense, who on the flip side of Dallas's did get shit on. They let up 33 points. They did have 3 sacks and a pick six. So if there's anybody you want to blame this loss on, you can't say it was on the D line. The D line was doing very good. They had 3 sacks overall. They had a fumble recovery. They had a fumble recovery for a touchdown by their first round pick that they got from a trade with the Bears, Jalen Carter. And overall, he's looking like a stud for the Eagles from a real life point of view. But other than that, the Eagles' defense got shit on. Their D line looked good. And then Darius Slay looked good. But other than that, James Bradbury was cooked chicken every play. And yeah, overall, the Eagles' defense definitely did not look like it was all that it's been hyped up to be these past 3 weeks. They've looked like shit, to say the least. Then on top of that, Dictatorship had Amani Hooker, who went out there and had a 10-point game, 5 total tackles. It's an okay performance. He went in the green just a little bit, so you're happy about that. He's been very consistent this season. My problem with him is he just doesn't have too much upside, but he is a solid player around the board and hasn't disappointed yet this season. And overall, I hope you enjoyed the season, Scrambled Wiggle Waggled. I hope you return for an upcoming season. I hope you enjoyed. Unfortunately, you're eliminated though. I don't think you're surprised by this, so I'm just gonna move on. I think you knew you were gonna be eliminated since week one. We'll move on to Pussy and Big Yawners. Now, Pussy started his entire roster and everybody got hurt, so now he's going to be going into the playoffs with absolutely nobody. The fucking dumbass. No, not really. That's more of a story for Big Yawners, ironically enough. But either way, we'll kick things off with Pussy, though. This match meant nothing for Pussy other than him choosing who is going in and out of the playoffs. Should he have beat Big Yawners, that meant Karen's husband would still be in the playoffs right now. Should he have lost to Big Yawners, then that's what knocked out Karen's husband. So overall, Pussy opted to let Big Yawners win this game more as a strategic point of view because, yeah, you look at Big Yawners' team and he's beat to hell and back. We'll kick things off with Pussy's team. Just because you didn't start your players, I'll still talk about them. Pat Fryermuth pretty much hit exactly on his projection in this game, funny enough. He was 0.04 off. 3 catches for 18 yards, and then he also had a 2-point conversion. I'm not a fan of him moving forward. I don't think you can trust him moving forward. The Steelers' offense is atrocious. The touchdown upside is just not there. When they are passing, it's going to everybody. Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, even Allen Robinson. A lot of the time, it's going to Jalen Warren or Najee Harris. They can't get a running game going. There's just no upside here. I honestly think he's cuttable unless you're desperate for a tight end, which I don't think you are if you're Pussy. Then on top of that, you also had DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift went out there and did fucking nothing. Bro was just there to get cardio, went 11 for 39, which I am joking. He had a disappointing performance, but it wasn't horrible. I've definitely seen worse. But overall, he didn't really do too much from a fantasy point of view, and yeah, that he definitely didn't help you in this specific game. And these past 2 weeks, he has really struggled. But the good news if you're Pussy is that he does have a very friendly schedule moving forward, so that should get better. Then on top of that, you also had Tyreek Hill, who actually went down with an injury in this game. He did before he got hurt. Well, not before he got hurt, but in between him getting hurt, he did get 4 catches for 61 yards for what it's worth. He started out another Tyreek Hill performance. It's unfortunate that he got hurt. I think everybody's hoping he gets to 2,000 receiving yards. I don't think there's anybody in the universe who doesn't want him to hit that at this point. But overall, I wish he had more. I think everybody does. But if you're Pussy, you are significantly hoping that Tyreek Hill is able to come back because he is probably your biggest player, your most valuable player around the board. For your second matchup that you're actually going to have against Big Yawners back-to-back in this upcoming matchup. Then on top of that, you also had Will Levis, Bobby Okereke, and DeAndre Hopkins. We'll kick things off with Will Levis. Will Levis kicked off the game by throwing a pick six. Now, to Will Levis's mayonnaise-eating ass credit, I would not expect a defensive tackle to drop back into coverage either. So, you know what? This is one of those times I'm going to say that the interception was not completely his fault. It is still his fault, but overall, he made up for it really well. 327 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 4 rushes for 15. From a fantasy point of view, if he's able to start scoring touchdowns, he could be so much better than he actually has been this season. From a real-life point of view, he still is making questionable decisions a lot of the times. But he is a rookie, so I think you can kind of expect that. Plus, the offensive line is doing him absolutely no favors. But either way, from a fantasy point of view, he's not looking great. He's just looking like a guy that sometimes will hit 20 points. I think that first week was more of a fluke than anything, to be honest. Then you also had DeAndre Hopkins, who, on the flip side of things, did fantastic. Probably one of his best games of the season. Went 7 for 124 and a touchdown. Very good performance out of him overall. This is the DeAndre Hopkins I think we all know and love. A lot of catches, a lot of yards, and a touchdown. Could not ask for more. Then on top of that, you also had Bobby Okereke play on Monday night. He had a disappointing game. He had 11 points, which isn't bad by any means in the slightest, but overall it's one of his worst games. Actually, it is his worst game of the season. He did still get 6 tackles. That's pretty disappointing compared to how good he's been this season, but in general, it could be a lot worse. I don't think you're very upset about that. I think this is probably more of a one and off situation. Then with Big Yawners had Jason Sanders, the Dolphins kicker. Um, with Jason Sanders, he went out there and had 10 points, hit very close to his projection, had 2 field goals, and then 3 extra points. I'd say that's a pretty solid night. Could it be better? Yeah, but overall, there's really not a thing to point out that's bad here. He made the kicks he had. And I can't really think of anything off the top of my head to knock him for a pretty solid performance there. Um, then on top of that, Big Yawners also had Tajay Spears riding his bench. Fantastic performance out of this guy right here, though. He went 7 for 29, so right off the bat, getting just over 4 yards per carry. But where he was really good was the receiving game, where he went 6 for 89. Fantastic performance right there. Tajay Spears has been looking like a very good option. I think Tennessee has a very good running back moving forward. In general, because yeah, that was a fantastic game for Big Yawners. And funny enough, if he actually started Tajay Spears, he actually would have had the 7 seed instead of the 8 seed. Tajay Spears single-handedly could have changed that outcome. Um, then you also had Hassan Reddick. Hassan Reddick went out there and actually had a really good game against Dallas, surprisingly enough. I'd chalk this up more to the fact that the Eagles were on defense through the entire game, so Hassan Reddick had a lot more time to go out there and actually make plays happen. He was able to get 2 sacks on Dak Prescott, and he was pretty much the only person on the Eagles not named Jalen Carter that was actually doing something. And overall, he had a pretty good performance, a very solid performance that he's had all season. Now, if you're Big Yawners, you know how I recommended that you started him or that you benched him this previous week? Start him next week because next week is different. This first week, you wanted to take your consistent points. This upcoming week, you need points because you know Pussy's about to put up a lot on you, so you're going to have to fight back and you're going to have to fight hard. Um, we'll talk about that in the start bench video, though, overall. But either way, both of these guys are actually going to be having a playoff rematch. This was just kind of Pussy choosing his opponent, and it ended up being Big Yawners. So we'll see how that goes. But either way, this specific matchup, Big Yawners showed a sample size of around 261 points while playing a lot of his players on the bench. So while he is injured to hell and back, he is still going out there and showing that he can fight with everybody in this playoff bracket. He is still going to be able to, put up a lot of points. If he starts those players on his bench, he easily could have reached near 300. So Big Yawners, I wouldn't count him out of it yet, even though his team is beat to hell and back. Then we'll look at Mr. Steeler Girl and Karen's husband. This was directly a playoff game. Like, literally, this was a playoff game. And we'll kick things off with Mr. Steeler Girl, who had Deron Bland. Deron Bland went out there and had not an okay performance, actually surprisingly solid performance. I wasn't really expecting this. He has struggled against good QBs all season. He had a 5-tackle game, and then he also had 2 pass deflects. Overall, it's a pretty solid night. 15 points. I don't think you're complaining about that. He found a way to do really good again. I was wrong. I thought for sure he'd have another bad week, but it seems like he's really starting to click things together, and maybe he'll be usable moving forward as well. Quite a few points in the green for Mr. Steeler Girl. Definitely helped him win this matchup for sure. Mr. Steeler Girl also had Minka Fitzpatrick, who hit almost exactly on his projection, which he is coming back from an injury, which is what I'd chalk this up to. I'm not that anything is wrong with hitting your projection, but you'd hope for more of those games you saw earlier in the season with around 18 points per game. He had 5 total tackles, which isn't horrible. It was just an all-around okay night. You'd hope for a bit more. Then with Mr. Steeler Girl, you have Micah Parsons, who went out there and was actually able to get a whole sack on the night against the Eagles. Pretty solid performance. Could be better, don't get me wrong, but he continues the trend of having a sack in almost every game this season, and this game was no exception. He went out there and managed to get it done. Then on top of that, you had TJ Watt, who unfortunately is going to be dealing with an injury, a concussion. So let's hope he doesn't miss for your game against Justin Lake's kids, because TJ Watt has been a vital piece of your team here. He had 5 total tackles on the game. Could have been better. You'd hope for sacks, and you certainly hoped he didn't get hurt. Unfortunately, he did, but he did go close to his projection, similar to Micah Parsons, where you kind of could make an argument for hoping they could get more, but overall they still came close to their projections overall. Then Mr. Steeler Girl, that was actually all Mr. Steeler Girl actually had. And overall, all of his players pretty much did okay to good. Nobody really stood out or anything like that, but they all did their part and got them the win over Karen's husband. And this was a win-in situation where the winner was in the playoffs and the loser was out due to what happened with Big Yawners and Pussy. And either way, we'll kick things off with Karen's husband here. The last team that we'll actually mention that actually got eliminated this previous week, unfortunately. I hope you rejoin us next year. I hope you had fun with the league this year. Unfortunately, you did get eliminated though at 7-7. Not a bad team at all. It is kind of a shame to see this team go out because this is a very strong team that Karen's husband was able to put together. Um, and unlike the other three that got eliminated, I think Karen's husband realistically did deserve a playoff push. They were basically like the FSU here, but either way, um, I'm just saying that because I do think their team is good, not that they like were cheated out of it or anything. Um, we'll kick things off with Karen's husband, who had Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard went out there and fought like hell for this win. He had a good 16.6 week. He didn't do too much in terms of the ground game. He did have 59 yards, but he didn't get too much per carry or anything special. Um, you also had him get 7 catches for 37 yards, which is what got him the majority of his points. Overall, a pretty good night from a fantasy point of view, and he did get in the green a little bit. So overall, it's a pretty good night. Um, then with Karen's husband, you also had Miami's team defense. Miami's team defense kicked off this game with that pick six. And from there, things kind of went downhill. They were getting bullied, especially in the second half, by Tennessee's offense. Um, I don't know what the hell they were doing. They only had one sack on the worst offensive line in the league. They had that one interception for the touchdown, which was great. Um, and then they had 2 fumble recoveries. Outside of that, they just kind of got bullied. They got thrown around by Tennessee around the board. The run game was bullying them. The receiving game was bullying them. I don't know what the hell happened. Miami just collapsed, to say the least, and this is what caused Karen to lose. Um, and overall, unfortunately for Karen, this is what caused them to lose, like I said. Went a few points in the red overall. And yeah, definitely not happy with that if you're Karen. Then Karen also had Christian Wilkins. You are pretty happy with him. Because while Miami shit the bed, Christian Wilkins had another pretty solid night with 5 tackles and a sack. He did his part. He did pretty solid. And he tried his best to get Karen that win. Unfortunately, Miami's defense just kept saying no. Um, then Karen's husband also had Jake Elliott riding the bench. With Jake Elliott, he went out there and hit the green by a few points, showed some of that field goal upside he had at the beginning of the season. Unfortunately, it's just been a little inconsistent over the middle point of the season. He started out very strong and has just been inconsistent as hell since. But last night was pretty solid. He had 2 field goals, though, and then he also had an extra point. So overall, it was a solid night. But other than that, the Eagles' offense just kind of got bullied, which set him up for the long field goals, which was good news for Karen's husband, but I wouldn't rely on it moving forward in any leagues. And other than that, like I said, Karen's husband, if you're watching this, I hope you rejoin in the upcoming years. I hope you enjoyed this league so far. And either way, it sucks to see you eliminated, but somebody had to go, and it looks like you were the unfortunate guy who drew the ticket. Um, then we'll talk about Booty Basher and Justin Likes Kids. Booty Basher, due to this loss, is going to be keeping his division title and will play Rictatorship. While Justin Likes Kids will play Mr. Steeler Girl. So Booty Basher, because he lost this, has a significantly harder matchup, at least according to the seeding, I'd say. And for the most part this season, Rictatorship has outplayed Mr. Steeler Girl, but Mr. Steeler Girl has really been coming back over the second half of the season, though, which is what is putting them here now. But either way, we'll kick things off with Booty, who had Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts just looked like shit overall. Threw 197 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, and then he ran 5 times for 30. Couldn't get anything going anywhere on the board. The Eagles' offense just got bullied. They just did not look good overall in this game, and yeah, it just wasn't great. Then you also had George Pickens. He went out there and had 5 catches for 19 yards. It seems like Trubisky really doesn't like passing to Pickens overall. The routes that he runs are very short routes, which isn't really how you should be using Pickens. Pickens is known for a mid out to deep out type guy. And we're using him, or the Steelers are using him on short routes, which really isn't helping. So overall, yeah, that's kind of disappointing. I'd say I wouldn't really trust George Pickens for most of the rest of the year. You did have Derrick Henry, who went out there and had a Derrick Henry style game with a good 17 for, well, maybe not a Derrick Henry style game. He had touchdowns that salvaged his night. 17 for 34 is awful. He only had 2 yards per carry, but he did have the 2 touchdowns, and he did have a nice catch for 17 yards. From a real life point of view, that's not good, but from a fantasy point of view, it works. He got you the points, and overall he got in the green quite a bit. Then you had Dallas Goedert, who hit 7 points even. With Dallas Goedert, he went out there in his first game back in probably about a month. He had 4 catches for 30 yards. a solid performance overall. I think he'll only get better as the weeks go on. I do think Philly, if there's any upside of what happened in that game, it's the fact that they do have Goddard back, and it is the fact that he will probably be getting better as the weeks go on again. Um, then with Booty, you also had um, let's see here, Tua Tagovailoa. Um, Now Tua was in a similar situation to Jalen Hurts. Both of these guys really did you no favors. 240 passing yards, went 3 for 15. This is kind of cementing my reasoning as to why I'm not a fan of Tua. I think Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle carry his ass. I think he's definitely the most overrated quarterback in the league. I don't think he's even top 15, to be honest. I think if you throw him on a team like, say, the Titans or the Bears or a team that just don't have a great offense, I think he would struggle hard. And you saw it tonight where he was missing Tyreek Hill and just could not function for the most part. I'd argue it's why they lost the game because, yeah, Tua just cannot make the right reads. He cannot. He's not that accurate with the ball. A lot of the times he needs people to be wide spanking open to make the play happen. It might be a controversial take, but it's my take nonetheless. And overall, he had a bad week. Won a good 19 points in the red. Not very good for Booty in the slightest. Booty also had Green Bay's defense, who, if you want to talk about not good in the slightest, gave up 24 points to the fucking Tommy DeVito-led Giants. Didn't do anything to get up stats except for 2 fumbles. Other than that, they played like shit. Gave up 24 points, did not get anything in terms of the defensive stats, and just couldn't do anything from a fantasy point of view against the worst offense in the football. Then Booty also had Josh Sweat. With Josh Sweat, he went out there and had 6 points. He had a few tackles. That was about it. He had 3 tackle assists, and that was about all he had. Or not tackle assists, 3 tackle solo. And that was pretty much all he did. He really couldn't get much going, couldn't get a sack or anything on Prescott. He kind of got bullied by the Cowboys' offensive line for the most part, outside of a few edge runs. Then, on top of that, you also had Rashad Gary, who, yeah, really didn't do much either. He got bullied by fucking, I'm trying to think of his name, the Giants' right tackle. I think it's Evans or something like that. Rashad Evans, who's been playing like shit this season. And yeah, Rashad Gary just could not do anything against him. Rashad Gary's funny. He'll go against a guy like Penei Sewell and just bully him and then get bullied by the worst right tackle in football. I don't have an explanation for it. Either way, Rashad Gary is definitely not a good option moving forward. You also had Romeo Doubs, who went out there and had 4 catches for 32. You'd hope for more catches, you'd hope for more yards, but overall it's an okay performance. Could be worse, could be better, but overall it's not horrible. Then you also had Tommy DeVito. With Tommy DeVito, he went out there and had 158 passing yards and a touchdown. He also ran 10 times for 71 yards. For a backup that nobody was expecting to do anything, I'd say it's pretty good. From a fantasy point of view, it was also pretty solid for where you got him. He's not one of the best options in the league. I'm not going to say go start him over Tua necessarily, but either way, it is probably better than I think anybody is expecting, to say the least. Then we will move on to Justin Lake's kids, who had Devon Achane. Devon Achane went out there and had 12.10, very close to his projection. He went 7 for 47, 5 catches for 24 yards as well. Very close to his projection. Didn't have any of those crazy weeks where he had like 5 touchdowns or anything like that. But overall, he did have a pretty solid week. He had a lot of yards per carry on the ground, both receiving and running. And overall, I think he'll probably do good moving forward as long as he can stay healthy. Then you also had Azeez Al-Shaair, who went out there and had another pretty solid night. Had a good 10 tackle game. Can't really ask for more. Pretty solid. Won a good few points in the green. I think you're happy with that if you're B-Dog. Then you had Raheem Mostert. You had him on your bench. Raheem Mostert went out there and pretty much was a second Devon Achane, except he actually got the touchdowns. He went 21 for 96, which is a pretty good stat line. He also had a catch for 4 yards, and he also had those 2 touchdowns, which made a good night go to a great night. Then you also had Reed Blankenship, who got hurt early on with a concussion. He only had 6 points. I would say this is more a matter of, he got hurt early on, so I wouldn't really say this is anything to be concerned with in terms of quality moving forward, but it might suck if you end up missing him come playoffs. You also had Devondre Campbell, who is, at this point, I'd say cuttable. I know 10 points isn't horrible, but he's getting old. He's very injury prone. And overall, even when he's playing, it's usually other guys that are getting most of the tackles. Even with Quay Walker being out in this game, he couldn't do shit. So overall, I do think that this guy definitely could be better. And I'd say he's cuttable if you're Justin likes kids, to say the least. Um, Either way, let's go and look at the game side of things. We will, of course, kick things off with the Patriots-Steelers game. The final score is 21-18. This was a game of halves, and what I mean by that is the first half, the Patriots did much better than the Steelers around the board, did very good. The second half, the Steelers are pretty much playing cat and mouse, trying to catch back up with the Patriots. The Steelers dominated in the second half. Granted, you can chalk a lot of that up to garbage time, whatever you want to call it. It's just kind of what ended up happening in this game, where the second half went to the Steelers and the first half went to the Patriots. In either way, um, that the final score of this game was very low scoring. We kind of all expected that, though. We'll kick things off with the Patriots. Bailey Zappi went out there and had a very good performance. As a backup, he went 19 for 28. To quote Mr. Steeler Girl, this has been a year of backups. He said that in a previous video. And this was no exception. He went 19 for 28, 240 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. That is a very solid stat line. That is a good stat line. If you're a Patriots fan, you really can't ask for much more out of Bailey Zappi. He's been pretty solid since day one for the time that he has been expected to start. I've noticed when he plays bad, it's usually whenever he's thrown in for last-second occasions, but usually whenever he's able to have time to work with the first starting team, he usually does pretty solid. They also had Ezekiel Elliott, who went 22 for 68 on the ground. Didn't get too much in terms of yards per carry, but he did have those 68 yards, though. I'd say that's pretty bad. You'd hope for a bit more, but to be fair, you were playing against a very tough Steelers defense with a horrible offensive line, so I'd say this isn't completely on Ezekiel Elliott. Bailey Zappi went 3 for 13 on the ground as well, so adding to his already really good night. In terms of receiving game, this ball was going all over the fucking place for the Patriots. Juju Smith-Schuster was not leading receiver, but leading receiver in yards. He went 4 for 90. Ezekiel Elliott had the most catches, 7 for 72, and that touchdown. Hunter Henry had 3 catches for 40 yards and 2 touchdowns. You had Tyquan Thornton get 3 catches for 17. Ty Montgomery, I haven't heard that name in a bit. He always just pokes his head around at random times. He had a catch for 17 yards. Then you had P.J. Brown go out there and get a catch for 4 as well. Jalen Reagor, of course, went out there and did nothing. I don't think anybody expected anything different. In terms of the defensive side of things, you saw I don't even know how to pronounce this guy's name. I think it's like J. Loa Tavai. He had 14 tackles on the game, a very good performance out of him. You had Jack Jones go out there and have 5 tackles. You had Kyle Duggar get 7 total tackles and then a half sack. You had Jalen Mills get the same stat line, except he didn't have that half sack. You had Amari Jennings, who had a 4-tackle game as well. Martavis Bryant had 5. Jawan Bentley had 7. You saw Mac Wilson get a sack. Christian Barmore had a half sack. You had Jabril Peppers go out there and actually have an interception from Mitch Trubisky. Other than that, there wasn't really too much to mention here, other than the fact that the Patriots' defensive line really didn't get home to sack Trubisky that much, and you can credit that towards the Steelers' offensive line actually getting better. So if there is a positive to draw from this game, if you're a Steelers fan, it is the fact that your offensive line is looking significantly better than it has in the past. Other than that, there wasn't really too much to mention from the Patriots side of things. We'll move on to the Steelers. First of all, Mitch Kissantitties went 22 for 35, 190 passing yards, a touchdown and an interception. His problem is every time he throws the ball, it's no more than 4 yards down the field. And I don't think that's really his problem. I think it's more of a play calling issue for the Steelers specifically. But either way, it was an okay game for what you can ask out of Trubisky. If you were planning on keeping Trubisky as a starter moving forward, I'd say this is disappointing. But for him just going in there as a backup on a Thursday night short call game, I'd say it was okay. You definitely hope for more. You definitely hope for better against a shitty defense like the Patriots. Well, not a shitty defense, but a shitty team like the Patriots in general. And overall, he just couldn't get it done, unfortunately. But he did also have 8 carries for 30 yards and a touchdown. He's always been good with the ground game, so that is some good-sided news if you're a Steeler fan. Connor Hayward had a whole passing attempt as well. I forgot to mention that. But overall, this is the one piece of credit I'll mention Trubisky, and that's the fact that the Steelers had absolutely no run game at all. And this game was no exception. They had Najee Harris go 12 for 29, getting 2 yards per carry. Jalen Warren went 7 for 11, getting 1.6 yards per carry. Just nothing there to help Trubisky actually play to his strengths. And he's always been known for being good on the play action, by the way, if you're curious. but Calvin Austin also had a good run for 12 yards on a sweep. Other than that, the run game just was not existent. In terms of the receiving, Jaylen Warren was the main. Well, actually, George Pickens had the most catches for 5 for 19. Jaylen Warren had second, 4 for 29. You had Deontay Johnson get 3 catches for 57 and the touchdown. You had Allen Robinson get a catch for 21. Najee Harris 3 for 19. Pat Freiermuth 3 for 18. Connor Hayward 2 for 15. Darnell Washington also had a catch for 12. And this was my point whenever I was giving Pussy the advice about Pat Freiermuth earlier on. There's just so many people getting this ball at this point. That's 8 different names. I'm not a fan of that from a fantasy point of view. The Steelers' offense already doesn't have much upside because they're just, in general, not good, so they don't get many touchdowns. And overall, when they do pass the ball, it's just all over the fucking place. You can see it right here. In terms of the defense, the main tacklers were Cam Hayward and Elandon Roberts and Nate Herbig. Cam Hayward had 6 tackles on the game. He also had a sack. Nate Herbig had 6 tackles on the game. Elandon Roberts had 6 tackles and a sack as well. Joey Porter had a nice game with 4 tackles. TJ Watt had 5 before he got hurt. Demondre Kazi had 3. Patrick Peterson had 3. You had Michael Walker actually go out there and get an interception on Bailey Zappi. That was pretty impressive. I think that's Blake Martinez that the Steelers actually hired. I haven't heard that name in a little bit either. Fun fact about Blake Martinez, he actually got fined for scamming people on the Pokemon card trading market, if you guys are curious about that story. Other than the Pokemon trading card market, I don't really think there was much else to mention on the Steelers here. They got shoved around at the beginning of the game. They got a little bit better at the second half, though, but overall, I think if you're a Steeler fan, this isn't looking too great, just because they did allow the Patriots to kind of shit on them at the beginning of that game, and yeah, that's definitely disappointing. Other than that, there isn't really much worth mentioning in terms of the Steelers here, and I guess we'll just move on to the next game. Well, real quick, before we move on to the next game, I just want to point out the not so subtle ref favoring, or maybe not ref favoring, but you can call it discipline, you can call it ref favoring, whatever you want to call it. There was 1 or 2 plays that I thought the Patriots got kind of screwed over on with these penalties, but it wasn't like blatant ref ball or anything, I'd say. But either way, the Patriots had 7 penalties for 59 yards, and the Steelers had a whole false start. Other than that, they didn't really do anything. I just thought that was pretty humorous. I always like calling out the penalties when I notice a big lopside like that. Other than that, we'll just move on to the next game. We'll take a look at the Eagles and the Cowboys. 13-33 is the final score, and that is way closer than the game actually was. This was complete domination by the Cowboys. This was terrible for the Eagles. If you're a Tatership or anybody else who's a Cowboy fan, you're fucking happy as hell about this, because, yeah, the Eagles went out there and got shit on. We'll kick things off with the Eagles passing game. Jalen Hurts went out there and struggled. He went 18 for 27, 197 passing yards. Could have been worse, could have been better, but, yeah, overall it wasn't great. You had, I don't even know how to pronounce that. It's their punter, I think. It's Bradley Mann or something like that, who had a 28-yard pass. Other than that, he didn't really do anything. Other than that, I don't really know what to mention in terms of the passing game. DeAndre Swift had a disappointing game in terms of the run, went 11 for 39. Could be better. Wasn't horrible, but overall, definitely on the bad side of things. He had Kenneth Gainwell have some nice runs, though. He went 4 for 28, so that was pretty solid. Jalen Hurts went 5 for 30 as well. He had a pretty solid night on the ground. Boston Scott went out there and had 3 carries for 9 yards as well. But for the most part, outside of Kenneth Gainwell and Jalen Hurts, the run game just couldn't get going with DeAndre Swift, though. Then with the receiving, and this is why the Eagles' offensive players are so good when it comes to the receiving. Look at that. There's only 4 people that are spreading this ball through. There's A.J. Brown, who went 9 for 94. Devontae Smith went 5 for 73. Dallas Goedert had 4 for 30, and then there was only 1 catch to anybody else, and it was to Olamide Zaccheaus, who had a catch for 28 yards. This is why the Eagles receivers are almost always good in fantasy, whether you're looking at guys like DeSean Jackson, DeSean Jackson, or Devontae Smith, or A.J. Brown, or hell, even back in the day with guys like Nelson Aguilar, Alshon Jeffrey. This is why pretty much the Eagles always keep a 2 wide out set for the most part. Sometimes they bring a third, but it's not too often. Sometimes you'll see Quay Watkins get involved, but usually the Eagles have 2 guys they prioritize getting the ball to, and then the third guys kind of get left out. That's why the Eagles' offensive players are usually really good on the flip side of the Steelers. I just figured I'd point that out. You saw Zach Cunningham get 9 tackles on the game as the main tackler. You saw, I don't even know how to pronounce the guy's first name, but it's something Brown with 8 tackles on the game. Bradley Roby had 7. Nicholas Morrow had 6. James Bradbury had 5. Marcus Tupiluto had 6. Kevin Byard had 5. Darius Slay with 4. Reed Blankenship with 3 before getting hurt. Jamin Davis had 5. Here's where things actually did get good for the Eagles. You had Fletcher Cox go out there and get a sack. The veteran got one. He's basically the flip side of, say, Cam Hayward. Then Hassan Reddick had 3 tackles with 2 sacks. Very good out of him. But that is literally where the upside ends if you're the Eagles. Things did not look good outside of those 2 players around the board. A.J. Brown looked good again, but I don't even want to say that. A.J. Brown, I will say this, got locked the fuck out up by Stephon Gilmore in the plays. Most of A.J. Brown's yards and catches came from the second half when they were already down by a lot. So I will mention that. I do think Stephon Gilmore won the cornerback versus wide receiver matchup. And Jake Elliott was perfect on his kicks. Other than that, there wasn't really much to mention. The Eagles just got shit on around the board. I can't really buttercoat it anymore. Dak Prescott went out there, and I'd say in terms of his accuracy, that definitely could be better. He went 24 for 39, 271 passing yards, and 2 touchdowns. Overall, he didn't do horrible. He didn't do elite or anything like that, but he did have another pretty good night against a very tough defense, for what it's worth. So overall, I'd say that's a pretty solid game. Tony Pollard went 16 for 59, similar to DeAndre Swift. Came a few yards under 4 yards per carry, which is a little bit on the bad side, but not horrible. Remember, about 4.1 is the average for NFL players. Rico Dowdle, on the other hand, went 12 for 46 and a touchdown. So overall, it does seem like Rico Dowdle might be progressively taking the Tony Pollard role, while Tony Pollard is starting to fall into the Ezekiel Elliott role, where if I had to guess, I would guess that Tony Pollard, as the season go on, will probably progressively start doing less and less, while Rico Dowdle does more, if I had to guess. Cal Turnpin also had a 22-yard run. Dak Prescott went 3 for 11 as well. In terms of the receiving, there were a lot of people to get this. There was Jake Ferguson went 5 for 72. CeeDee Lamb went 6 for 71 and a touchdown, the main receiver, of course. You saw Tony Pollard get 7 catches for 37. You had Michael Gallup go 3 for 48 and a touchdown. Brandon Cooks had 2 for 37. Rico Dowdle had a catch for 6 as well. But for the most part, CeeDee Lamb won his matchup. Michael Gallup had a few nice catches, and then Brandon Cooks just got locked up on the flip side of A.J. Brown. Then Stephon Gilmore had a lot of tackles. He had 9 tackles on the game. He had Donovan Wilson get 5, Deron Bland get 5, Jaron Kearse had 4, Jalen Lewis had 4, Micah Bell had, I'm too used to fucking Red Dead Redemption. Bell had 4, Desmond Clark had 4, Micah Parsons had that sack. And overall, there wasn't too much going on in terms of big plays. Overall, they just forced the Eagles to punt a lot. And that was a pretty good performance out of the Cowboys, to say the least. And other than that, I guess we'll move on to the next game. Next, we'll look at the Packers and the Giants. Final score is 22-24. If you're a Giants fan, I think you're really happy with what you're seeing out of Tommy DeVito. It will raise a lot of questions as to who's going to be starting in the upcoming year, with Daniel Jones playing like shit this season, the whole offense playing like shit in general, and all the injuries. The Giants are definitely in a confusing situation where it doesn't look like they know what to do. They don't want to tank. They don't want to win. They don't want to lose. They're fucking all over the place with what they're doing. But for what it's worth, Tommy DeVito is looking impressive every step of the way. Goes out there and gets an impressive win on the Packers. If you're a Packers fan, you're not happy about this in the slightest. There's no reason to be losing to a team like the Giants. The Giants have a few pieces, sure, but overall they're just a terrible team for the most part. And yeah, the Packers definitely struggled. This is a game they probably should have won. But either way, we'll kick things off with the Packers. Jordan Love went 25 for 39, threw a touchdown and 1 interception, had 218 passing yards. Not a great night for Jordan Love in the slightest. He wasn't passing for much per throw. And overall, I think he definitely could have done better in this game. I think he's one of the, I don't want to say overrated. I think that this was just a very bad game for him overall, and I do think this is one of those games that kind of showed his downside and showed why he isn't as good as some people give him credit to be. A.J. Dillon went 15 for 53, had a bad night in terms of the run per carry, but overall it wasn't horrible, could have been worse, kind of like the last few guys we mentioned. Jaden Reed went 4 for 38, had a really good night on the ground. He also had a touchdown. There's Paris Taylor, who went 4 for 30. He did pretty good. Jordan Love went 2 for 2. Thank God for those two rushing attempts for 2 yards. Tyler Kraft went out there, had the most yards. He went 4 for 64. Romeo Dobbs went 4 for 32. Jaden Reed 8 for 27. A.J. Dillon 2 for 25. P.J. Taylor 2 for 22. And there was Donovan Wicks who went 2 for 20. And then Malik Heath had a 6-yard touchdown as well. If I had to guess as to why the Packers struggled so much, I would say it's probably the absence of Christian Watson, if I had to guess. But we can only wait and see. Plus, they have been missing Aaron Jones too, so credit where it's due. But either way, their defense, Darnell Savage actually came back. I actually didn't realize he came back. I must not have noticed that whenever I was watching the highlights. He actually had 7 total tackles on the game. They had Isaiah McDuffie get 7. Devondre Campbell gets 6. Devontae Wyatt had 4. Corey Valentine had 4. Keeson Nixon had a good 4-tackle game. Other than that, there was really nothing to mention. No sacks, no interceptions, no nothing. The defense just really didn't do much this game. And overall, this game was definitely a disappointment for the Packers. You also had Adam Carlson, I think is his name, who also missed a field goal as well. So, yeah, I'm not really too happy about this if you're a Packers fan, to say the least. If you're a Giants fan, you don't really know what the hell to expect moving forward, like I said. But either way, we'll look at the Giants next. Tommy DeVito had a near-perfect game. Now, I know that doesn't look like anything special, but overall, he only missed 4 passes on the night. He went out there, did his job, did enough to win the game. 17 for 21, 158 passing yards, and a touchdown. So overall, I definitely do think this was a solid performance, to say the least, out of Tommy DeVito. Saquon Barkley went 20 for 86. He went out there and cooked up, had a good 4.3 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. A very solid night out of Saquon Barkley. Tommy DeVito did pretty good on the ground as well, 10 for 71. Wan'Dale Robinson had some nice rushes, 2 for 36. Matt Breida had 2 for 16. Overall, Green Bay just did not have an answer for this run game in the slightest. It didn't matter who it was. Everybody did really good there. Wan'Dale Robinson was the main receiver, went 6 for 79. Isaiah Hodgins went 2 for 22 and a touchdown. Saquon Barkley went 3 for 15. Daniel Bellinger had 2 for 15. Darius Slayton 2 for 14. Jalen Hyatt went 2 for 13. In terms of the defense, Deontay Banks went out there and had 12 total tackles on the game. Bobby Okereke had 6. Ashawn Robinson had 8. I don't know who the hell Flott is. Jason Pinnock had 4 in an interception. Micah McFadden had a half sack on 5 tackles. Kayvon Thibodeau had 8 total tackles on the game and a half sack. Giants fans are very happy about him. He's been solid since day one. Azeez Ojari had a half sack on 4 tackles. Dexter Lawrence had a half sack on 3. And overall, if there is anything that's looking good for Giants fans, it is that defensive line. Very strong defensive line out of Azeez Ojari, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeau. Although they are missing Leonard Williams now, so it got a little bit worse. But either way, it seems like they are doing just fine without him. They also had a missed kick, I forgot to mention. The Giants did with Randy Bullock. And either way, let's go ahead and talk about the Titans and the Dolphins game. This was a pretty solid game, 28-27. I would actually debate say that the main reason the Dolphins lost this game was because of Tua, like I said. Now, sure, Tyreek Hill was out, so you can blame it on that. But either way, the point stands where Tua cannot function without Tyreek Hill, or without insanely good receivers overall. We'll kick things off with the Titans, though. Will Levis went out there, had 23 for 38, a touchdown and an interception. He made a few really, really fucking stupid throws on the night. Other than that, he does look like he's kind of a Jameis Winston type player where he takes a lot of shots and a lot of the times they do pay off because he is a pretty accurate player. His decision making is just what holds him back. He went 23 for 38, 327 passing yards, which is pretty good. And then he also had 1 touchdown, 1 interception. So overall, he just needs to keep working. I think if the Titans can manage to get the mistakes out of him, then overall I think he could be a very good quarterback moving forward. Derrick Henry could not get shit going on the ground, 17 for 34, but at least he had the 2 touchdowns, which salvaged his night a little bit. Tajay Spears actually outplayed Derrick Henry, went 7 for 29. He had 4.1 yards per carry. Will Levis went 4 for 15. Traylon Burks even had a run for 5 yards. DeAndre Hopkins went out there and bullied the Dolphins defense. He went 7 for 124 and a touchdown. Tajay Spears went 6 for 89. Chikosium Okonkwo had 5 for 46. Nick Akini Westbrook went 2 for 28. Chris Moore had a catch for 22. Derrick Henry a catch for 17. And Traylon Burks just didn't do shit. He was there for cardio. You had Azeez Al-Shaair who had 10 tackles on the game. Sean Murphy-Bunting had 7. Kayvon Wallace had 7. You had Tavon Avery had 5. Roger McCreary had 7. You had Harold Landry actually go out there and got not 1, not 2, but 3 sacks on Tua. So you can argue that maybe because with Tua's issues, it was partially because he was constantly facing pressure. Whatever your argument is, I do think that Tua just isn't ready to handle it, though. Whenever he doesn't have a clutch player like Tyreek Hill. You saw Amani Hooker get 5, Jack Gibbons with 5, Arden Key had a sack. I think that's Jamon Johnson went out there and had a sack as well. Overall, a very good game for the Titans defense for the most part. They were really able to go out there and hold the Dolphins, which is supposed to be one of the best offenses in the league, to 27. And for whatever reason you want to chalk it up to, I personally do blame a lot of it on Tua, though. The Titans were able to win this game. Then we'll take a look at the Dolphins. Tua Tagovailoa went 23 for 33, 240 passing yards, a touchdown, and no interceptions. Or no touchdowns and no interceptions. And overall, I definitely think this could be a lot better. Like I said, I'm not a fan of Tua. I think I'm one of the bigger Tua slander guys or haters. Raheem Mostert 121 for 96, 2 touchdowns. Devon Achane went 7 for 47, no touchdowns, but overall, very good running game. The Titans had no answer for it. Even though they're supposed to be one of the better run defenses in the league. Tua Tagovailoa went 3 for 15. Jalen Waddle was the main receiver, 6 for 79. Tyreek Hill had 4 for 61 whenever he was playing. Cedric Wilson had 2 for 30. Devon Achane went 5 for 24. Deron Smythe had 2 for 16. Braxton Berrios had 2 for 13. Alec Ingold, the fullback, had a catch for 13. Raheem Mostert had a catch for 4. And as a Bears fan, it makes me laugh my ass off the fact that Chase Claypool had no catches in this game, even with Tyreek Hill getting hurt. Then in terms of the defense, David Long was the main tackler with 8 tackles. You had Byron Jones with 7. I don't know who Kohu is. He had 5. Deshaun Elliott had 8. Christian Wilkins had 4 and a sack. You had 5 with Bradley Chubb, 4 with Andrew Van Ginkel. You had a pick 6 from Zach Seiler, the defensive tackle. That's not too common to see. He had 4 tackles on the game total. And other than that, Jason Sanders did miss that kick. I actually did forget to mention that earlier on. But other than that, he did look pretty solid. And other than that, I think that's about all there is to mention in terms of all these games. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me double check to make sure there was no ref ball or anything. I didn't think there was. Yeah, there was a lot of penalties thrown. I knew that, but I didn't think there was any ref ball or favoritism that at least I noticed. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I put a lot of time into this one. I hope you guys liked this one. I'm going to get back at you guys with the Mr. Steeler Girl hype video, the Justin Likes Kids hype video, the 2 episodes of Civil War, and then we will go on to the regular schedule that we normally would be on. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you guys later.